This is our first case study, and it's Japanese expansionism from 1932 to 1942. So this is a paper one topic. We will cover causes of expansionism, looking at Japanese nationalism and militarism and its foreign policies, political and economic issues in Japan that affected foreign relations, political instability in China that assisted in Japan's expansion. Then we'll look at the events of expansion, like the invasion of Manchuria and northern China in 1931, and the Sino-Japanese War of 1937 to 1941. We'll also look at the Three-Power Pact and the outbreak of war with the United States starting at Pearl Harbor in 1941. We'll also look at responses to expansionism, the League of Nations, including the Lytton Report, political developments in China, including the formation of the Second United Front, and international responses, including U.S. initiatives and increasing tensions between the two states. This is an overview of just the origins or the causes of Japanese nationalism and militarism. Key factors is they wanted equality. They were determined to dominate East Asia, and they needed raw materials to fuel its military. Its impact was it created an imperialistic foreign policy. Nationalism led to militarism, and they relied pretty heavily on the slogan, "Rich country, strong military." So our four main causes of Japanese expansionism are A, Japanese nationalism and militarism, B, militarism in their foreign policy, C, economic and political issues, and D, domestic instability and foreign affairs. The Meiji Emperor of Japan reigned from 1867 to 1912. This was a period of tremendous reform in Japan, including the abolishment of feudalism, industrial development, and the creation of a parliament and modern governing systems. The Meiji Emperor declared Japan's constitution the first such legal document for the country in 1889. The Meiji Constitution, the work of a special group called the Privy Council, stated clearly that the Emperor of Japan was head of state and that he was a divine individual. Government authority came from the Emperor, and government ministers were responsible to him alone, not to the Diet, which was Japan's newly created parliament. The military was allowed tremendous independence in this document, reporting directly to the Emperor and holding 2 cabinet positions in all governments. The Constitution required all laws and cabinet decisions to be agreed to by all ministers. This meant that if any one minister did not agree with a law or decision, they could simply refuse to sign. This would cause the government to collapse and new ministers to be appointed, or a compromise would have to be reached to accommodate demands of opposing ministers. This increased the power of the military in that they could essentially veto any government decision and could threaten to dissolve a government unless their demands were met. The Diet was also created. The Constitution created this parliament, and it was composed of 2 divisions, an elected House of Representatives and an appointed House of Peers. The House of Peers was composed of nobility, high taxpayers, famous individuals, and special appointments made by the Emperor. The House of Representatives was elected by those with suffrage, which would eventually include all men over 25 years old. The House of Representatives could create and pass laws, which then had to be approved by the House of Peers. If approved, these laws went forward to the Cabinet of Ministers for consideration. If the Cabinet approved the law, it went forward to the Emperor and the Privy Council for consideration and possible approval. Modernized Japan required all citizens to attend school for 4 years. Later, this was expanded to 6 years. The stated purpose was to teach practical skills and the ability to problem solve, although what it did achieve was increased literacy throughout the country. This led to people reading books, newspapers, and journals, including those that criticized the state. Literacy was directly connected to increased awareness of government and its policies, and people's growing opposition to many of these. The Ministry of Education eventually altered the national curriculum, which now emphasized loyalty to the state, family, and community. Students were instructed to value Japan's special institution, the emperor, his divinity, and other aspects of Japan's history and culture. The emphasis on Japan's uniqueness was a huge factor in the development of ultranationalism, also called radical nationalism, which is closely related to fascism. Offering oneself to the service of the state and protection of the emperor was also encouraged. Teachers in training had to learn military drills as part of their teaching skills. Oh my goodness. And by 1920, students throughout the country were also required to participate in these. The special connection between the education system and the military would later greatly aid in the military's popularity and eventual control of the political system. Many politicians and philosophers believed that Japan was unique among world states and as such had a special mission. Some of these things that these individuals believed made Japan unique included: it had an emperor who was divine and descended from the sun goddess. It had not been conquered by European powers or the USA. It had an ancient history of being independent. The vast majority of its people were Japanese and shared a common culture and history. It was the only non-European state to defeat a European state in modern war. And it was a major military and industrial power by 1920, and one of the most important states at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. Philosophies developed that Japan not only was special compared to other countries, but should also remove all non-Asian dominance from the region. Since Japan was the only successful independent modern state, then it was the mission of the Japanese to use these qualities to lead the rest of Asia. Nationalism developed into radical nationalism by the 1920s. There were many elements to radical nationalism, but essentially proponents opposed any politicians or policies that in their view weaken the emperor and therefore Japan. To this end, assassinations and assassination attempts were a means of terrorizing officials into following and implementing their philosophies. Radical nationalism led to outright racism towards other non-Japanese in Japan's empire. Closely connected to the philosophy that Japan had a special mission or destiny was that of militarism. In order to protect Japan, secure its colonial possessions, and dominate Asia, which might lead to a confrontation with Britain, France, or the USA, a large navy and army were required. The military had held a special place in Japanese society for centuries, so the idea of a strong military was not an unusual one. The Meiji Constitution, for example, had also enshrined the special relationship between the military and the emperor, with the military reporting directly to him. The military was a political force in Japan, holding cabinet positions in the government. In this way, the army and navy were able to affect politics and ensure their growth and maintenance. In the late 1920s, as economic crises continued to weaken the civilian government, militarism became increasingly popular as it was tied to expanding the empire, which many hoped would bring economic relief and new lands to settle peasants. So in conclusion, this first cause is Japanese ultranationalism combined with their militarism. It begins with modernization under the Meiji Restoration and continues on throughout the 1920s and 30s. So we're going to see this ultra strong nationalism rise up. You know, the idea was to just get everybody enthused about the emperor and to develop this kind of cult of emperor. During the Meiji period, you get a parliament, you get a governing system, but they become very complicated. And because of unwritten rules in it, they really aren't that modern or that different from the absolutism that existed before then. Really, the biggest difference from the shogunate to the Meiji Restoration was that power shifted from the aristocracy right back to the emperor, and now he was in total control. And this will last all the way up into World War II. So next we'll look at the next cause on the following video.